They say blood is thicker than water, but in my family, blood was just the currency they used to buy their golden child whatever he wanted. I was sitting at the head of a massive, custom-built mahogany table on the top floor of my company's headquarters, about 15 minutes away from closing a $40 million acquisition. The boardroom was dead silent, filled with serious executives and lawyers reviewing the final pages of the contracts. That's when the secure line on my private tablet violently buzzed. It was Marcus, my head of corporate security. He was a former military contractor who knew better than to ever interrupt a Tier 1 board meeting unless the building was literally on fire. I discreetly tapped the screen. "Report," I whispered, keeping my face completely neutral. "I am incredibly sorry to interrupt your meeting, boss," Marcus said, his usually stoic, gravelly voice laced with a mixture of confusion and sheer disbelief. "But we have a massive situation down in the main lobby. You need to look at camera feed number 3. Right now." I swiped right on my tablet, bringing up the live 4K security feed of our pristine, white marble ground floor. Usually, that lobby is a quiet, highly professional space filled with wealthy investors and silent security guards. But today, it looked like a literal circus. Standing dead center in the middle of my corporate lobby were my parents. The exact same two people who had ruthlessly kicked me out into the freezing rain 15 years ago with nothing but a trash bag of my clothes. And standing right next to them, looking as arrogant and pathetic as ever, was my older brother, the undisputed, severely in-debt golden child of the family. But they weren't just standing there asking for a visitor's pass. They were actively unrolling a massive, cheap, bright red vinyl banner for the entire lobby to see. I zoomed in on the camera feed. Painted in huge, sloppy white letters across the red banner were the words, "Heartless CEO abandons starving parents in poverty." My mother was literally throwing herself onto the cold marble floor, fake sobbing and screaming at the top of her lungs, putting on a theatrical performance worthy of an Oscar. My father was loudly shouting at my terrified receptionists, aggressively pointing his finger in their faces. Meanwhile, my brother was smugly standing back, recording the entire spectacle on his smartphone, clearly trying to go viral and publicly blackmail me. They thought they had me perfectly cornered. They figured the wealthy, successful CEO would immediately panic, rush downstairs, and quietly write them a massive, multi-million-dollar check just to avoid a public PR scandal. They genuinely thought they still held the same power over me that they did when I was a helpless teenager. I didn't panic. I didn't feel an ounce of fear. Instead, I felt a cold, sharp smile slowly spread across my face. I locked my tablet, stood up slowly from my leather chair, and casually buttoned my perfectly tailored suit jacket. "Excuse me for a moment, gentlemen," I said to the confused board of directors, my voice perfectly steady and dangerously calm. "It seems a few stray dogs have wandered into our lobby. I need to go downstairs and handle the pest control." As the private, glass-paneled elevator smoothly glided downward, separating me from the quiet luxury of the executive floor, the soft mechanical hum started to drown out my thoughts. Watching my parents put on that pathetic, screaming performance on the lobby cameras didn't trigger a single ounce of sympathy in me. It only unlocked a very specific, deeply buried memory from 15 years ago. You see, to understand exactly why a pair of supposedly starving, abandoned parents would storm a corporate lobby with a professionally printed protest banner, you have to understand the night they threw me out like a piece of absolute garbage. I was 18 years old. It was a miserable, freezing Tuesday night in November, and the rain was pouring down in relentless, freezing sheets. I had just come home from a grueling 12-hour double shift at a local diner, my uniform still smelling of cheap grease and bleach, only to find the front door deadbolt from the inside. When I finally managed to get my mother to open the door, I wasn't greeted with a warm towel or a hot meal. I was greeted with a heavy, black plastic trash bag filled with my clothes, aggressively shoved directly into my chest. "What is this?" I asked, my teeth chattering on the wet concrete porch, cold rainwater dripping down my face. My father stepped up behind her, his face completely devoid of any parental warmth or hesitation. "We need your bedroom," he stated coldly, completely ignoring the violent storm behind me. Your brother just got accepted into a private business mentorship program. He needs a proper, quiet home office to focus on his startup. You're 18 now. You're legally an adult. Figure it out." I stared at them, completely stunned. My brother, the undisputed golden child who had already dropped out of 3 different community colleges and spent his days blowing their money on video games and designer sneakers, suddenly needed a home office. And to give it to him, they were literally making me homeless in the middle of a torrential downpour. "Please," I begged, my voice violently cracking over the sound of the thunder. "I have nowhere to go. I don't have any savings. I just gave you my entire paycheck for rent. Just let me sleep on the living room couch until the weekend. Please." My mother looked at me with an expression of pure, unfiltered disgust. It was a look reserved for a stray animal, not a child she had raised. "Don't be so dramatic and selfish," she snapped, her voice dripping with venom. "You've always been incredibly jealous of his potential. We are investing our resources into the child who is actually going to make something of himself and take care of us. Lose our number and don't ever come crawling back." She slammed the heavy oak door shut right in my face. I heard the deadbolt loudly click into place, locking me out of my own family forever. I spent that entire night huddled under a concrete bus shelter at the edge of town, soaking wet, clutching that flimsy black trash bag to my chest while the rain hammered down. I didn't sleep a single wink. That was the exact moment the desperate, scared kid inside me died and the ruthless, unstoppable CEO was born. Now, 15 years later, the elevator softly chimed, pulling me sharply back to the present. The polished steel doors slid open, revealing the massive, chaotic lobby. It was time to step out there and show them exactly what kind of monster they had created that night in the rain. The polished steel doors slid open, and the chaotic noise of the main lobby instantly hit me. But before I stepped out onto that pristine marble floor, I took one final, deep breath, letting the weight of the last 15 years settle over my shoulders. They had told me to figure it out. And that is exactly what I did. While my brother was busy playing pretend CEO in his cozy, stolen home office, draining our parents' bank accounts for his endless string of failed, pathetic startups, I was living out of a beat-up, second-hand Honda Civic. I worked 3 exhausting minimum wage jobs just to keep from starving. I showered at cheap 24-hour gyms and spent every single night huddled in the back booth of a local diner, teaching myself corporate finance, market trading, and business management until my eyes bled. I didn't have a safety net. I didn't have a wealthy family to bail me out. I didn't receive a single birthday card, a text message, or a single dime from the people currently throwing a temper tantrum in my lobby. I built a $40 million empire brick by grueling brick, fueled by nothing but pure, unadulterated spite and the absolute refusal to fail. Every single dollar in my corporate accounts was soaked in my own sweat. They owned absolutely 0 shares in my survival. I finally stepped out of the elevator. The sharp, authoritative click of my expensive shoes echoed across the marble floor, instantly slicing through the chaotic shouting. Marcus, my towering head of security, immediately spotted me. He gave a subtle hand signal, and the 6 heavily built security guards who had formed a defensive perimeter around the madness instantly parted, creating a clear, direct path for me. The second my mother saw me walking toward them, she didn't look guilty. She didn't look ashamed for abandoning her child. Instead, her eyes lit up with malicious glee, like a predator who had just successfully trapped its prey. She immediately dialed her theatrical performance up to an 11. "There she is," my mother shrieked, dramatically pointing a trembling finger right at me while clutching her chest, making sure every single employee, client, and passerby in the lobby could hear her. The heartless billionaire. Look at her, wearing custom suits while the family who gave her life is literally starving in the streets. How can you sleep at night, you ungrateful monster? My father chimed in right on cue, aggressively waving the cheap red vinyl banner. We are your parents. We raised you. You owe us for every single meal we put on your plate when you were a child. We are not leaving this building until you give us our rightful share of this company. I stopped exactly 6 feet away from them. I didn't flinch. I didn't look embarrassed or panicked. I just slowly looked from their ridiculous, glaring protest banner to my father's angry, red face, and finally locked eyes with my smug, grinning brother, who was standing behind them with his smartphone held high, recording everything. They wanted a public spectacle. They wanted to use the immense pressure of a corporate crowd to publicly shame me into submission. They thought I would quietly hand over millions of dollars just to protect my PR image. But they were about to learn a very hard, very public lesson about what happens when you try to blackmail someone who has absolutely nothing to hide. The entire lobby was dead silent, watching this absolute train wreck unfold. I could see my receptionists exchanging horrified glances and a few high-profile clients standing near the glass doors, looking genuinely bewildered. But I just stood there, perfectly still, letting my mother's fake, theatrical sobbing echo off the high marble walls. I didn't yell back. I didn't try to cover the camera lens or rip the smartphone out of my brother's hand. I just crossed my arms, tilted my head slightly, and looked directly at my father. "All right," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the quiet lobby, completely devoid of any panic or emotion. "You've stormed my building. You've got your captive audience. You've got your little camera rolling. Let's hear it. What exactly is this rightful share you think you're entitled to?" My father puffed out his chest, clearly mistaking my icy, calm demeanor for total submission. He genuinely thought the public pressure was working and that I was terrified of a PR nightmare. He lowered his side of the cheap red banner slightly and pointed a thick, accusing finger directly at my face. "We consulted a lawyer," my father lied loudly, making sure his voice boomed so everyone in the room could hear his fake victimhood. "As the parents who gave you life and put a roof over your head, we are legally entitled to compensation for our sacrifices. We want 50% equity in this company transferred to our names by the end of the week. We want the deed to a 6-bedroom mansion in the gated community upstate. And we want you to publicly apologize, right here and right now, for abandoning us in our old age." A collective gasp actually rippled through the crowd of onlookers. Even for a public shakedown, the sheer, audacious entitlement of demanding half a $40 million empire and a luxury estate simply because they met the bare legal minimum of keeping a child alive was genuinely mind-boggling. But my father wasn't done. He aggressively gestured toward my brother, who was still smugly recording the interaction, grinning like he had just won the lottery. "And furthermore," my father barked, his face turning red with exertion, "since you clearly need proper, educated guidance to run a corporation of this size, you will be appointing your brother as the executive vice president of operations, effective immediately, with a full executive benefits package and a 7-figure starting salary." I actually had to bite the inside of my cheek to stop myself from bursting into laughter right then and there. The absolute, unhinged delusion was almost impressive. They weren't just here to beg for a handout. They were here to completely hijack the life I had built from the ashes they left me in. And as I looked at my brother, watching him lower his phone and confidently step forward to claim his imaginary throne, I knew it was time to let them dig their grave a little bit deeper. My brother shoved his phone into his pocket and swaggered forward, completely separating himself from my parents. He walked with this exaggerated, puffed-out chest, trying to project the aura of a powerful, wealthy executive. But up close, the illusion was absolutely pathetic. He was wearing a flashy, supposedly designer suit that fit him terribly, a chunky fake gold watch that was slightly too shiny, and a cloud of overpowering, cheap cologne that practically burned my eyes from 3 feet away. He didn't even look at me first. Instead, he turned his attention to Marcus and the wall of heavily built security guards standing nearby. "All right, you heard the man," my brother barked, aggressively clapping his hands together like he was suddenly in charge of the entire building. "Show's over. You guys can back off and get back to your posts. Oh, and you," he pointed a harsh finger directly at Sarah, my lead receptionist, who was standing terrified behind the front desk. "Start packing up your things," he sneered, loud enough for the whole lobby to hear. "You completely disrespected my mother when we walked in here by asking for our IDs. As the new executive vice president of this company, I don't tolerate low-level staff who don't know how to treat my family. You're fired. Get out of my building." Sarah's eyes went wide, and she looked at me in absolute panic. Marcus, who had been standing perfectly still with his hands clasped behind his back, subtly shifted his weight. I saw his jaw clench, his eyes locking onto my brother like a laser targeting system. He leaned in slightly, waiting for my strict order to physically grab my brother and throw him through the glass doors. But I didn't give the order. Instead, I raised my right hand, giving Marcus a very subtle, sharp wave to stand down. I didn't want this to end yet. I wanted them to keep talking. I wanted every single arrogant, delusional, threatening word permanently recorded on my lobby's high-definition security cameras, with dozens of reliable witnesses standing by. "Don't worry about Sarah," I said smoothly, turning my attention back to my brother. I kept my voice completely level, dripping with cold amusement. "Let's talk about you. An executive vice president of operations. That is quite the impressive title for someone whose last known business venture was a failed crypto mining farm in our parents' basement." My brother's smug, punchable smile faltered for a fraction of a second. His face flushed a deep, angry red before he quickly recovered, puffing his chest out even further to overcompensate. He thought he was intimidating me. He thought the sheer audacity of his demands in front of my employees was backing me into a corner. What he didn't realize was that I was just handing him the shovel, and he was enthusiastically digging his own grave right in the middle of my marble floor. My mother, seeing my brother stumble over his words and sensing that they were rapidly losing control of the narrative, decided it was time to deploy their nuclear option. She let out a loud, theatrical wail, dropped entirely to her knees on the hard marble floor, and aggressively reached out to grab the hem of my suit jacket. I immediately took a sharp step back, my expression turning to pure ice, completely avoiding her grasp. "How can you be so incredibly cruel?" she shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly off the glass walls, making absolutely sure every single client and employee in the lobby was focused entirely on us. "After we sacrificed our youth for you. We are being evicted tomorrow. We have absolutely nothing to eat, and you are standing in your billionaire tower, humiliating your own blood for sport. Help us." My father quickly stepped forward, capitalizing on her distraction. He unzipped a cheap, worn-out briefcase he'd brought with him and pulled out a thick, stapled stack of papers. He aggressively shoved the documents right toward my chest. "We know exactly how you corporate elites operate," my father sneered, his voice dropping into a low, menacing growl. "You care about your stock prices, your investors, and your perfect public image more than anything else in the world. Well, guess what? There are 3 reporters from local news stations waiting right outside in the parking lot. We called them on the way here." He aggressively tapped the papers in his hand with his index finger. "This is a legally binding asset transfer agreement that we had prepared," he demanded, his eyes wide with a terrifying mixture of desperation and greed. "It signs over the 50% equity, the house deed, and your brother's executive employment contract. You are going to sign this right here, right now, to make us whole. If you don't, we march right out those glass doors, give an exclusive, tear-filled interview to the press, and tell the entire world exactly what kind of psychopathic, abusive daughter you really are. We will completely destroy your company's reputation before the market even opens tomorrow." A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the lobby. Even my brother stopped recording for a second, a greedy, victorious smirk plastered across his face. They genuinely thought they had me in a checkmate. They honestly believed that a cheap, public extortion attempt, wrapped up in a toxic family drama bow, was their ultimate trump card. They thought the threat of a PR nightmare would terrify me so much that I would blindly sign away half of my life's work just to make the screaming stop. I looked down at the poorly drafted, rumpled legal document in his hand. Then I looked up at the massive, 20-foot digital LED presentation screen hanging on the wall right behind my reception desk. I didn't reach for a pen. I didn't beg them to keep their voices down. I did the exact opposite. I slowly looked back from the massive LED screen hanging on the wall to my father's desperate, greedy face. I didn't reach for his cheap pen. I didn't beg him to call off his imaginary reporters. Instead, I let out a low, genuinely amused laugh that made his confident smirk falter instantly. I calmly walked right past my completely bewildered parents, stepped behind the sleek marble reception desk, and reached for the public address microphone that connects to the lobby's surround sound system. I tapped it twice. The sharp, booming thump-thump echoed through the massive room, ensuring every single pair of eyes was glued directly to me. "Attention, everyone," I announced, my voice projecting clearly and powerfully, completely drowning out my mother's fake, theatrical sobbing. "My father here has just threatened to go to the local press and tell them exactly why my family is currently facing eviction and starvation. But honestly, why wait for the 6 o'clock news? Let's just share the absolute truth with everyone right here, right now." I looked down at Sarah, my receptionist, who was still shaking slightly but watching me with wide, expectant eyes. I gave her a sharp, definitive nod. "Sarah," I ordered, "override the corporate promotional loop on the main screen. Cast file, Project Parasite from my secure drive." My brother's face instantly dropped. He lowered his smartphone, the record button completely forgotten. "Wait, what are you doing?" he stammered, his voice suddenly pitching up in genuine panic. Behind me, the massive 20-foot digital LED screen went pitch black for a split second. Then, it flashed to life, illuminating the entire lobby with a painfully bright, high-definition projection of several heavily stamped legal documents, bank statements, and a very official-looking court notice. The crowd of wealthy clients, investors, and employees collectively leaned in, their eyes scanning the massive letters. "As you can all clearly see," I said, gesturing up at the glaring screen, "my parents aren't being evicted because I abandoned them. They are being evicted because, exactly 3 months ago, they secretly remortgaged their fully paid-off house for the 5th time. And why did they do that? To cover a massive $400,000 mountain of high-risk, predatory corporate loans racked up by my esteemed brother, the man standing right there in the fake designer suit." My brother actually staggered backward as if he had been physically slapped. His mouth kept opening and closing like a suffocating fish, but he couldn't form a single word. My father's hands started trembling so violently that he dropped his ridiculous fake contract right onto the floor. I clicked a button on the desk, and the giant screen transitioned to a zoomed-in, heavily highlighted default notice. "But wait, it actually gets better," I continued, my voice dripping with absolute venom. "Because when that $400,000 wasn't enough, our self-appointed executive vice president here decided to forge our parents' signatures to take out an additional set of predatory, high-interest loans. He completely bankrupted them. He destroyed their credit, lost their family home, and now that the collectors are literally knocking on his door threatening to take his assets, they decided to show up here and try to extort the daughter they threw out into the freezing rain." The silence in the lobby shifted. It was no longer shocked or confused. It was heavy, suffocating, and filled with absolute, unfiltered disgust aimed directly at the three of them. The trap hadn't just snapped shut, it had completely crushed them. The atmosphere in that pristine marble lobby shifted from dramatic tension to a cold, suffocating hostility faster than I could blink. The wealthy investors and corporate executives standing nearby weren't just whispering anymore. They were staring at my family with open, unfiltered disgust. My mother's theatrical wailing completely died in her throat. She slowly scrambled off her knees, her face incredibly pale, looking frantically around the room at the crowd of people who were no longer looking at her like a tragic victim, but like a desperate, pathetic scam artist. You hacked us," my brother finally shrieked, his voice cracking violently in a humiliating panic. He aggressively pointed a trembling finger at the massive LED screen, still displaying his ruinous debts for the entire building to see. "That's illegal. You can't just access my private financial records." I stepped out from behind the reception desk, slowly walking back toward them. Every single click of my heels against the marble sounded like a judge's gavel dropping. "I didn't hack anything, you absolute idiot," I said, stopping a few feet away from his trembling, sweaty face. I didn't raise my voice, but the absolute venom in my tone made him shrink back. When you're the CEO of an asset management firm, acquiring high-yield distressed debt is child's play. Especially when those aggressive private lenders legally sold your defaulted portfolio to a subsidiary company, which I happen to own. My brother's eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated horror as the reality of his situation finally clicked. "That's right," I whispered, leaning in just enough so my parents could hear the absolute finality in my voice. "I didn't just find out about your debt. I actively bought it. I own every single cent you owe. And I am absolutely, categorically, never forgiving it." My father suddenly lunged forward, completely dropping the act, his face twisted in desperate rage. He actually raised a fist, stepping aggressively toward me. "You ungrateful little..." Before the words could fully leave his mouth, a massive, unmovable wall of solid muscle stepped smoothly between us. Marcus, my head of security, didn't even draw a weapon. He just clamped a heavy, vice-like hand firmly onto my father's shoulder, squeezing just hard enough to make my father let out a sharp gasp of pain and instantly drop his fist. "I strongly advise against finishing that sentence, sir," Marcus growled, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that echoed perfectly in the quiet lobby. I looked at my family, the people who had thrown me out into the freezing rain and told me to never come back, now standing completely paralyzed, humiliated, and utterly destroyed in the center of my empire. Their fake leverage was gone. Their public blackmail attempt had spectacularly blown up in their faces. But I wasn't quite done. I had one final, devastating card left to play. I looked at my father, who was still pinned firmly in place by Marcus's massive hand, his face rapidly draining of all its aggressive, red color. "Did you really think," I said, my voice echoing coldly in the dead-silent lobby, "that I built a $40 million empire by being careless? That I wouldn't do a full corporate threat assessment the second my company went public? You three were at the absolute top of my liability list." I turned slightly and held my hand out to Sarah. Without missing a single beat, my receptionist reached under the marble desk and placed a crisp, heavy blue legal folder directly into my palm. I flipped it open, revealing a formally bound, heavily stamped document that looked very different from the cheap, rumpled forgery my father had just dropped on the floor. "This," I announced, holding the official document up for them, "to see, is a permanent restraining order. It was signed and approved by a state judge last Thursday, the exact same day I finalized the purchase of your pathetic gambling debt. It legally bars all three of you from coming within 500 feet of me, my residence, or any corporate property I own." My mother let out a strangled, terrified gasp, her hands flying up to violently cover her mouth. The reality was finally crashing down on her. "But you didn't just violate a strict court order today," I continued, gesturing up to the sleek, black dome security cameras mounted on every single corner of the high marble ceiling. "You walked into a heavily monitored corporate facility, caused a massive public disturbance, and actively handed me a written contract demanding my assets under the explicit threat of media defamation. And your brilliant golden child over there literally recorded the entire thing." My brother frantically shoved his hands into his pockets, desperately trying to hide his smartphone, but his hands were shaking so violently that he almost dropped it. "In this state," I whispered, my voice cutting through the tense air like a razor blade, "that isn't a tragic family dispute. That is textbook felony extortion." My parents stared at me, their eyes wide with sheer, unadulterated horror. The catastrophic magnitude of their mistake had finally registered. They had walked into my building expecting to bully a terrified teenager into a multi-million-dollar payout. Instead, they had confidently marched themselves right into a multi-year prison sentence. My mother dropped back down to her knees, but this time, there was no theatrical acting. Tears of genuine, panicked terror were streaming down her face. She reached out a trembling hand toward me, opening her mouth to frantically beg for mercy. But she didn't even get the chance to speak a single word. Because at that exact second, the piercing, unmistakable wail of approaching police sirens cut through the silence, flashing sharp red and blue lights directly against the lobby's floor-to-ceiling glass doors. The heavy, floor-to-ceiling glass doors of my lobby aggressively slid open, and 4 armed city police officers strode purposefully into the building. The flashing red and blue lights from their cruisers outside bathed the pristine marble floor in a chaotic, strobe-like glow, officially ending the ridiculous circus my family had tried to orchestrate. My brother's arrogant, tough guy facade completely shattered the second he saw the badges. He suddenly looked like a terrified, cornered child. Wait, he stammered, frantically backing away as two officers immediately approached him. He held his shaking hands up in surrender. This is just a massive misunderstanding. We're a family. We were just leaving, I swear. You don't need to do this. Sir, keep your hands where I can see them and turn around, the lead officer commanded, his voice carrying absolute, undeniable authority. He was completely unimpressed by my brother's pathetic whining. You are under arrest for felony extortion, public disturbance, and violation of an active restraining order. My brother tried to pull his arm away, but the officer swiftly spun him around. The sharp, metallic click of the heavy steel handcuffs snapping tightly around his wrists echoed through the dead-silent lobby. It was, without a doubt, the most satisfying sound I had heard in 15 years. Seeing her precious golden boy in handcuffs broke whatever was left of my mother's sanity. She scrambled frantically across the marble floor, desperately reaching toward my expensive shoes, her face smeared with ruined makeup and genuine, panicked tears. Please, she wailed, entirely abandoning every single ounce of the vicious pride she had walked in with. Please, sweetie. He's your brother. We're your family, you came for me. You can't let them take him away to prison. You have enough money to make this go away, please, I'm begging you. I slowly looked down at the pathetic, sobbing woman at my feet. The woman who had slammed a heavy oak door in my face during a freezing rainstorm and told me to lose her number. I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't feel sad. I just felt completely, utterly indifferent. I took one step back, ensuring she couldn't touch me. I begged you 15 years ago when I had absolutely nothing, I whispered, my voice completely devoid of any warmth. And you told me I was legally an adult and that I needed to figure it out. I tilted my head, offering her a chillingly empty smile. Well, I figured it out. Now, it's your turn. I gave Marcus a brief, definitive nod. My security team stepped in alongside the police, grabbing my parents by the arms and hauling them roughly to their feet. The officers began marching my brother, who was now openly, loudly sobbing like a toddler, toward the exit, while my parents were aggressively escorted right behind him, their cheap red protest banner left abandoned on the floor. And the absolute best part? The cherry on top of this beautiful disaster? Those 3 local news reporters my father had so confidently bragged about calling to ruin my reputation? They were waiting right outside the glass doors. As my family was forcefully dragged out of the building in handcuffs, the reporters' massive broadcast cameras were rolling, capturing every single humiliating second of their devastating perp walk for the entire city to see on the evening news. I stood perfectly still, watching through the massive floor-to-ceiling glass doors as the flashing red and blue lights slowly faded down the street. The chaotic wail of the police sirens drifted away into the city traffic, taking 15 years of toxic baggage right along with it. Inside the lobby, there was a heavy, stunned silence. You could hear a pin drop on the marble floor. I took a slow, deep breath, smoothing out an invisible wrinkle on my suit jacket, and completely let go of the past. The vulnerable, terrified 18-year-old girl who had been thrown out into the rain was finally, permanently gone. I turned around to face the crowd. Dozens of my employees, several high-profile clients, and the wealthy executives from the board meeting were still standing there, completely frozen, processing the absolute masterclass in crisis management they had just witnessed. I offered them a polite, reassuring smile, my voice returning to its normal, calm, corporate tone. I want to sincerely apologize to all of you for that highly unprofessional interruption, I announced, projecting my voice so it carried across the entire room. Unfortunately, in the world of high-finance asset management, you will occasionally encounter desperate individuals who believe that public extortion is a viable business strategy. I looked over at the lead investor for the $40 million acquisition, an older, notoriously strict billionaire who was standing near the front desk. But let this serve as a very clear, transparent demonstration of our corporate policy, I said, looking directly into his eyes. This company does not negotiate with extortionists. We do not yield to public pressure, and we protect our assets with absolute, ruthless efficiency. No exceptions. For a split second, nobody moved. And then, the notoriously strict lead investor slowly nodded his head. A look of deep, profound respect crossed his face, and he actually started to clap. Slowly at first, but within seconds, the entire lobby joined in. The executives, the clients, and my employees were applauding, not just for the spectacle, but for the ironclad leadership they had just seen. I gave a humble, appreciative nod to the crowd. "Sarah," I said, turning back to my receptionist, who was now smiling brightly, looking incredibly relieved. I pointed down at the cheap, crumpled red vinyl banner that my parents had abandoned on the pristine marble floor. "Have maintenance throw that trash in the incinerator where it belongs." And Marcus, my towering head of security, stepped up, giving me a sharp, respectful nod. "Yes, boss. Great work today. Make sure you pull all the security footage from multiple angles and forward it directly to our legal team and the district attorney by end of day. I want their prosecution airtight." "Already on it," Marcus replied, a rare, subtle smile breaking through his stoic expression. I turned on my heel and walked confidently back toward the private, glass-paneled elevator. The doors smoothly slid open, welcoming me back. I stepped inside and pressed the button for the top floor. I had a $40 million acquisition to close, and absolutely nothing in the world was going to interrupt me again. The glass-paneled elevator smoothly arrived at the top floor, its soft chime welcoming me back to the quiet, sunlit sanctuary of the executive level. The absolute chaos of the lobby was gone, replaced by the hushed, professional hum of my empire. I walked back into the boardroom. The executives and lawyers were already seated around the massive mahogany table, their pens ready. We didn't mention the circus downstairs. We just got straight to work. 10 minutes later, the ink was dry. The $40 million acquisition was officially closed. But honestly, as the executive shook my hand and filed out of the room to celebrate, I realized that the multi-million-dollar contract sitting on my desk wasn't the biggest victory I had won today. I poured myself a glass of water, walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, and looked down at the sprawling city far below. For 15 years, a tiny, buried part of me had still been that terrified 18-year-old girl, standing in the freezing rain, clutching a black plastic trash bag, wondering why she wasn't good enough for her own parents to love. I had spent a decade and a half building this entire corporation just to prove them wrong. But as I watched a tiny, blinking police cruiser merge into the city traffic far below, taking my toxic past away in handcuffs, I realized something profoundly beautiful. The anger was entirely gone. The resentment had completely evaporated. That scared little girl in the rain was finally at peace. I was completely, utterly free. So, if you are sitting behind a screen watching this right now, and you are dealing with a toxic, manipulative family that constantly makes you feel worthless, I need you to listen to me very carefully. DNA does not give anyone the right to destroy your life. Sharing blood does not mean you are obligated to share your peace, your sanity, or your hard-earned success with people who only view you as a resource to be drained. Sometimes, being rejected, abandoned, and thrown out into the freezing rain feels like the absolute end of the world. But looking back, being cut off by them was the single greatest gift I ever received. Because it forced me to stop begging for a tiny, miserable seat at their table and pushed me to build my own damn kingdom instead. A kingdom where the doors are made of heavy glass, the security is impenetrable, and people like them will never, ever have the clearance to enter. Stay strong. Know your worth. Build your empire in silence and never, ever let anyone make you feel guilty for protecting your peace. Thank you so much for watching. If my story helped you today, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and keep building your own kingdom. I'll see you in the next one.